All right, let's jump in. Audio looks like it's working. Excellent. So this session, we're going to be looking at the basics, like the very basics of Blender. Many of our builders and creators in the Monaverse have come into the space and noted how complicated everything looks. So bouncing from Blender to Unity and all of those sort of things. So we're going to be focusing a little bit more on getting the basics down for those people to get a little bit more comfortable with the creation and development process when you're coming from other utilities or never looked at the metaverse itself. So this includes people who've looked into Revit, or even from other 3D tools, because Blender does a few things a little differently. So anyone from anywhere can basically look at this workshop and the tutorials that will probably stem from it, and hopefully get a bit more of a better understanding of Blender. So with that, let's jump in. Oh, that's a thing. Hang on. There we go. I do exist. Cool. All right. So first we need Blender. Now Blender. Hang on a second. Blender.org. I think it is. Yep. So Blender can be found at blender.org. Basically, we have sort of downloads, so you can just jump onto that and get the latest version. They are constantly updating it, and they're updating it really well. It's also free, which is amazing, because I find it, for the most part, actually better than a lot of other tools, such as 3D Studio Max, especially for the price that they have, which is not free. So, yeah, Blender's great. So let's get into it. First up is basically what is Blender. So Blender is a 3D tool that allows you to create 3D assets. It also can be used to make 2D assets, animation. It actually does video editing. That's one of the areas it's kind of weak at, but it can do it. You can sculpt, you can do unwrapping, which we'll get to later. You can do animation, you can render, you can do all sorts of things. So when you open the space for the first time, though, it can be a bit intimidating because there's a lot of buttons, for sure. But a lot of it, to be honest, isn't actually used. Like, most of these menus I will not use. Basically, these are kind of just different layouts for what you want to do. But when it comes to it, I will usually only use layout, UV editing, maybe shading. Yep, no, that's it. So there's three. But when it comes down to it, all of these are purely just different layouts. So I could actually change this one to do some editing of this layout to make it look and work and function how I see fit. Now, when it comes to most of it, though, this is the one you want. So let's have a look at that. So one of the big differences, and one of the most important buttons in the whole thing, is this one here. Blender uses a different approach to other 3D applications, including 3D Studio, in that the asset that you're working on needs to sort of change state in order for you to edit it. So in object mode, everything is a separate object. And then if you want to edit it, you actually have to go into the edit mode, and then you can do these sort of things. You can edit multiple objects at once, so you can do it, but this is one of the biggest differences between other tools and this one. So, shortcut and hotkeys are your best friends. It will speed up the whole process rather than going up here every time. So to change this to edit mode is just pressing tab. So we've got that. There are other modes, of course. So sculpting, Vertex paint, I haven't used that one, but it could be useful. Weight painting, that does get useful if you're doing rigging. So if you're doing an avatar, a VRM avatar or something, then you'll use weight paint to apply the vertices, sorry, to the rig or the bones. And texture paint I also don't use very often. So when it comes down to it, I use object mode, edit mode mostly, and maybe weight paint if I'm doing avatar related. Up the top you have some basic menus, of course. Once again, don't use most of them. I might use undo, which is Control Z. File, definitely. So if you're using FBXs or OBJs or any of those sort of assets, you would go import instead of open. And then when you're exporting to Unity, you will usually use export FBX. FBX is the best format for Unity to understand at the moment. So yeah, getting used to exporting an FBX is a key thing. A lot of the metaverse does use GLB or GLTF, so you could do that here as well. And if you have some of the add-ons, so we have VRM for Blender, for example, you can export the VRM itself. So export is your best friend for that. What else do we have? Each mode, so object mode, has a different menu set up here. So say in object mode, I can go add, and these are all of the 3D tools we will look at. I don't use object very often, except for maybe shade smooth, so most of these I don't use. Select is useful in specific situations, but more in the edit mode. And view, hardly use, mostly because of hotkeys I use. We'll look at those in a second. You can use these. This is how it selects things, I believe. I just leave that, never use it. Down here, we have a bunch of tools that allow us to edit our objects. But once again, these are shortcuts that I'll get to in a second. But basically, we have our selection tool, cursor, which is in Blender. It's kind of a useful thing. I don't use it very often, but a cursor is, think of it like a point in space. So that little circle here ties with this one. And that allows you to move this to somewhere else and then use that information in different ways. So I could rotate or scale it around that point instead of the pivot point of the asset. Then, of course, we have move, rotate, scale, and kind of everything. Once again, I usually use hotkeys for these ones. We'll go into those in a second. Annotate, measure, and add cube. Very rarely use those at all, but sometimes I'll use annotate to basically show you how to do things. So that's that. What else is there? Up here, we have different things to help our creation of assets. Hey, blockchain chat, how's it going? Appreciate the kind words. So up the top here, we have different transform orientation. So where do I transform an object? So this will be on a global, so kind of on its own. Local, each object has its own pivot. So it would rotate or scale according to that. Normal, never use it. Gimbal, never use it. View, never use it, because I use that when I rotate the preview. Cursor, also never use it. But that's with this if you want to use that. You can 100% use them. I don't, but up to you. This one is important though. I use this quite a bit. What this does is notes what the pivot point is that you will rotate or scale. So if I had 5 different objects selected, and I want to scale them from the center of them, I will use median point. But say I wanted 5 different objects and I wanted them to scale separately from their own pivot, I would use individual origins. Another one is active element. So the last thing you select. So if I hold shift, I can select multiple objects. it will scale from whichever one was selected last, I think, or first, whichever this one. So camera. So yeah. Snap is super useful, and I use this a lot, especially with retopology or low polygon creation from a high polygon asset. So basically, I can snap the thing I'm moving or whatever based on an increment, a vertex, an edge, a face, a volume, edge or edge perpendicular. So for example, if this was a high polygon asset, I could place vertices on the top of this object with snap to face, for example. So I can create an asset on top of another asset that has lower polygons, for example. So I use this all the time. Another useful one is proportional editing. So if I put that on, what that does, just quickly, is if I move or press G, so we'll get to that in a sec. So you'll notice that I can move the one vertex. Now, if this is on, you get like a circle, and if you use your mouse cursor, you can do some really cool proportional editing things, which is really, really useful in different situations. So proportional editing is great as well. Hey, Julio, how's it going? Fantastic. Yeah, Blender it's amazing, but it's a thing. So happy to help you on that journey, because it is 100% a journey. All right. So we have that menu done, that layout system done, these ones done, that's all done. So the top left is done. Okay. Let's go over here. Now, right. So, this one, don't use it. This one, also don't use it. This one, do use a couple of the elements in here, and I will go over them because they're super useful. So if I go down to, so I click on this, not this, because that's kind of everything. If I go down to this, it shows all the viewport overlays, so the grid and all sorts of stuff there. Yeah, I'm a fan. I love Blender, to be honest. Apart from a couple of things, like some things I really hate. So weight painting, I don't know why they've done it as they have. But yeah, apart from that one thing, basically 99% of the things are amazing. Like better than 3D Studio Max. I was getting really annoyed with that. So that's why I moved over to Blender. So happy that I did. And it's free. It's amazing. Why are they doing this? Why are they so nice? All right. So back to the viewport overlays. The biggest, not biggest, the most common one I will use is face orientation. The other ones are useful for sure, but this one right here is really, really good because blue will show you that the normal, and the normal is basically if I have a face, the normal is the direction sort of perpendicular from that. And in game development, normals are extremely important because game engines will only have one normal. So if I had a plane in the game engine, it will only show one side, and then when I look at the other side, it will be invisible. So the normals are actually very, very important unless you use a special shader that will show both, but that is more expensive and slows down your space. So you only want to do that when you have no choice. So normals, I like this picture, it's pretty cool. So normals are very important to understand when you're doing game development. So this square and cube, this cube, for example, is all blue, which means that the normals are facing the right direction. But if you're importing a sculpt from Gravity Sketch, or if you're bringing in an asset from somewhere, what might happen, and don't worry about this just yet, but well, let's do a couple. Yeah, let's do this. Normals flip. So what would happen is you might have that, which is great, but then you'll have these two red ones. So if you imported this into a game engine, you would see all the blue normals, but you would not see the red ones, even though the polygons are there. So normals are very important and easy to fix on the grounds that you can select the polygons and go normals, flip, just those two. Or if I select all of the asset, like so, and then go mesh, there we go, mesh, normals, recalculate outside, it will make sure they're all sort of facing out, usually. So, depending on the mesh, sometimes it'll be a little more complicated or it doesn't really figure it out that well. But when it comes to mesh normals, going to in edit mode, once again, that's a tab thing. Go to mesh, normals, and then you got some tools there to fix that. But that's not so much this. This is purely what does in edit mode this tool, face orientation, super useful. Now notice how all of those, and pretty much this applies to everything in Blender, the state you are in, object mode, edit mode, will change all of this information. This is very context sensitive, I think you could say that Blender is. So where you are will change the hotkeys, will change the details, will change a lot of things. Takes a bit of getting used to. And sometimes you'll find, why can't I do that? It's because you're in the wrong mode, and therefore you'll start learning very quickly the troubleshooting of why can't I see that when that tool is not coming up. So say, for example, I wanted to find the face orientation. It's not here, but it is down here. So I can use it in object mode if I want to. But if I go to edit mode, it's a little bit more complicated, but it is there as well. So context sensitive everything, which complicate things a little bit, but yeah, really good. Speeds up the whole process when you learn it, if that's the case. So a lot of things I do think fall under that, in the fact that it is more complicated to learn it, but once you learn it, it's a lot faster than if it wasn't that way. So it works out in the end. So yeah, when it comes to that section, face orientation is the main one. Now up here, I use these a lot. I should learn the hotkeys, but I don't. But note, you can easily find the hotkeys at the bottom of each thing you roll over. So some of them don't have hotkeys, some of them do. This one you will use a lot, and you got Alt-Z if you want it. I usually click it because that's not one I've ingrained in my head. But this is what they call X-ray. So what X-ray does is, if I go to edit mode, if I select all of those faces, if I go over here, why does that work? It doesn't usually work. Okay. Okay. So what usually happens is, if you have X-ray mode off, and I do this, it will not select the assets on the back end. So without X-ray mode, it usually only selects the ones in the front. So if I put X-ray mode on, I can do that, and it will select them all. Maybe they've changed that in one of the latest updates, but yeah, if you can't select all of the assets on an object, put it to X-ray mode, and then you can select all the way through. But in this case anyway, X-ray mode allows you to sort of see through the object. So super useful, depending on the mode that you've got it in. Ooh, hang on. Maybe that's why. Okay, let's try something. So we're in edit mode once again. So with face orientation off, nope, does work. Huh, interesting. Okay, I'll get back to that one. But either way, X-ray is very, very useful if you can't select your assets all the way through, or you want to see your asset all the way through. Next up, we have view modes, or viewport shading types, I guess you could say. Yeah, viewport shading, it's the official term. So we have wireframe, which makes everything a wireframe. Once again, different modes will change what that looks like. So let's just go to object mode for now. We have basic shading, I guess you could say, or solid shading. Then we have sort of like a low level material preview. And then we have like the render preview. I very rarely use these until I'm getting to the texturing. If I'm creating an asset, I will basically bounce between these two all the time. Notice that the X-ray will be applied individually on the setting that you have. So you'll bounce a lot between those. Super useful. Don't use this. I don't use this. You might. I don't. Okay. Next. Here we have a lot of tools that you might not have a couple of these when you start. A lot of these tabs are from add-ons, or let's say plugins, that you might add to Blender. So this VRM one, for example, is the VRM for Blender add-on that allows you to create VRMs. This one is Auto Rig Pro, which speeds up the rigging process. I had to buy that one. So Blender Market and other locations, like Gumroad, for example, would have add-ons that you can buy for Blender. Create is Archimesh, which is a tool that creates like architectural things. Super useful, but the assets it creates are not game ready. So a lot of the polygons are not what you would use in a monospace because there's a lot more polygons that you need. So it would be good as a starting point, perhaps, but you'd have to clean them up depending on the asset. So once again, those would not be there if I remove those. However, item is there. Item describes the location. So where is it in world space? The rotation. So where is it rotated? The scale and the dimensions. So let's have a quick look at that. So if I wanted to, I could do this. No one ever uses it this way. Just saying you can. But also if you want to enter your numbers, so you want to make it exact, you can do that. Now, I'm going to say this one a few times in this tutorial, because if anyone skips, they will miss it. Before exporting to a game engine, you want an asset's scale to be 111. That's it. That's the main point. Now, so say for example, if I scale this up, that'll be 222, and it'll be this, but this is wrong. Because when it gets to Unity, the scale is going to be just off. It doesn't really know what it's doing. So, the way around that is select the asset and press in object mode, Control A. And this is what you call applying transforms. Now, the big one we want is scale. So I can just go scale, and this will be 111. And it doesn't work every time because sometimes it just doesn't work, but this has a much higher chance of being accurate in Unity or any other tool if you're using it. But we're focusing on Unity for Mona. So this would be 4.79 meters in size and 1 scale, and that will improve a lot of the processes on the Unity side. So I'm going to bring this up every single time because it is a very important element that if you didn't know, you just don't know. So yeah, Control A. So the main one is scale. I will usually do all transforms, but it depends on a few things. We'll worry about that next time. So I'm going to undo that and get it back to 1. So yeah, applying transforms, making sure that your scale is 111 before export is very important. So that's that. Next we have tool, which comes up depending on what the tool you're using is. So I don't use this very often, to be honest. It comes up depending on what I'm doing, so we'll worry about that when we need to. View, also very rarely use. So that's that. This tool is very, very useful. Basically, it allows you to sort of focus on sides, and then moving around is the other thing. And we'll look at that in a second. Next up, we have our scene collection, I guess you could say. So this is where your assets are. You can put kind of the equivalent of folders in the scene collection. So that's up here. So a collection is basically a folder, and you can name it. Naming stuff is done by double clicking. And then when you add an asset, so add an asset, it will be in there. So that's that. So let's delete the cube. So press delete and select our cool stuff, and then go add mesh cube. And that's the same thing again in the right thing. I can, of course, drag and drop assets into here. So that's very, very useful. And keeping your space organized. That's pretty much it. There are a bunch of other things, but we don't have to worry about them. This is mostly about organization through folders and your assets there. If you want to, you can hide an asset. This one is hide from render. So if you're making a render in Blender, I can just hide it there, but still see it in the space, or the other way around. So those are useful. Now, the next section, we'll get to that in a sec, because that's really big. The second last section is down here. This is animation stuff. So if you're not doing animation, don't worry about it. But this basically comes down to animation. So you can change this. It's a little finicky. I'm going to go, there we go. So to dope sheet, timelines, all that sort of stuff. We're not going to be looking at animation. That's a much later thing. So you could actually skip that. And then here. This is basically a bunch of information, and we need our assets so we can sort of figure out what we're on. And to find out each one is actually just roll over the object and it will tell you. So the active tool and workspace settings, some different things there. This is rendering, which is a big thing if you're rendering in Blender. So there are 3 different engines of approaching how to render. Basically, Eevee is really fast, but less accurate. Workbench, no one cares about anymore. And Cycles is slower, but more accurate. So it depends. And this comes back up to this one here, viewport shading. So we have that. So Cycles and Eevee, they look slightly different, but the speeds will be different. And the settings of each engine will be very different as well. If you're doing baking, don't worry about that. But baking is putting high polygon information onto low polygon. That is under cycles. So bake down here. But once again, not important. I've covered that previously. When I'm making an asset for Unity, I will very rarely use rendering. Because the rendering in Blender will look very different from what it looks like in Unity, and Unity is the goal with that. So, useful to know, but generally I won't use it. Seeing this is kind of a rendering as well, like how big do you render the image? Once again, don't use it. This one is view layer properties, never use it. Scene properties, never use it. World properties, never use it. These are all sort of more if you're doing things in Blender for Blender. So rendering, animation, or images and things like that. If you're building in Unity, you won't use any of it. This is some extra information on the material, like the collection. Never use it. This one I will occasionally use. So this is object properties. So this is our object. The one I will use a lot is viewport display. So I can change it on how it looks. This particular object, I can change how this looks in the viewport. So sometimes I will want it in front of all other objects, so I'll turn that on. Sometimes I might want the wireframe visible. So if I go that, you can see the wireframe on it. You can change it just to bounds, which is the box around any object. So if that was a sphere, it would still look like that. I can do a wireframe here. So I will use this one quite a fair bit. If I'm navigating a space or a complicated space. Apart from that, yeah, don't really use the other ones. Modifiers are pretty useful. One example would be, well, a modifier is basically a tool that allows you to do cool stuff to your asset. Common ones that I use is mirror. So let's say, why is that not working? There we go. So mirror is based on, say, the pivot, and then when I edit one side, it will do a mirror, which allows you to create symmetrical assets really quick. There are many of these that you might use. Let's get back to basics. There we go. And I won't go into them because each one is a small tutorial in itself. That said, feel free to play with them. I will use mirror a lot. What other ones do I use a fair bit? I'll use weighted normal, but that's like normal stuff to clean up the result. Not important for you if you're starting. What else would I recommend? So mirror is definitely one. Screw is actually quite useful if you want to create a lathe effect. So if you want to make a cup, you could sort of use some edges and then it'll rotate around it and then you make a cup or a lathed object. So screw is actually pretty good for that. Once again, the labels or the names of the assets are different between each program. So that would be lathe in 3D Studio Max, for example. I wouldn't have thought to think of screw as the equivalent. So yeah, there are some naming issues between apps, especially with 3D tools and gaming tools. So there's that. What else? About it. Really? Shrink grab is useful. Shrink grab will basically sort of like squish things around as other assets. Use that sometimes, but not too important. What was another one that I use? Decimate is useful if you're trying to get a high polygon asset down to a low polygon asset. That might help. So decimate or remesh. Where's that one? Remesh. So remesh and decimate are both tools that you can use to get a high polygon asset down to small polygon asset. Low polygon assets are very important in game spaces, especially WebGL spaces. So if you're looking at Decentraland, you're looking at ridiculously small polygon count. Mona has a higher polygon count because they're larger in file size and things like that. But you do have to consider polycounts regardless because it is limited, if anything, in file size, but also the ability for the computer to render it depending on what kind of computer you're rendering it on. Decimate and Remesh are both tools that do this. It's not as good as doing it manually, but it is 10 times faster. So those tools are very, very useful. The rest we'll get to later. Well, in much later tutorials. This is the basics. This one, particle properties, not important. If you're doing particles in a monoverse, you'll do that in Unity. Unity has its own particle system, so yeah, don't make them in Blender, I don't think. Physics properties, also not important. Object constraint, not important. This one, do I use this one? Object data properties, no, don't use it. This one is materials though, which is very important. So a material needs to be applied to an asset, and you can just go new, double click, rename it, cool material, and then this material will be imported. Well, this material slot will be imported in Unity, and then you can put a Unity material onto it. I will always make my materials in Unity, because getting materials from here to Unity and make it work the same is actually really hard to do. So there are add-ons, plugins to make it easier, but just on Blender's own things, I find it much easier to control materials in Unity. But you do have to apply the materials here so that it understands what polygons have what textures. So there's that. Let's get rid of that one. And last one, also don't use that one. So most of these are useful, but the ones that you will actually use are not that many. So that's that. Okay, so that's navigating Blender as a whole. I went into a bit of detail on all of them, but that's just a quick look at which ones I actually use on a regular basis for that. Now, how's that for everyone? The next thing we're going to do is actually get to our asset. So let's look at that. Let's say we have our cube. Let's go back to sort of this one because it's easier to work with. It's also faster. So click on the object you want to edit. Navigation. Let's do that. So let's have a look. Middle mouse click will move around the asset like so. You'll use that a lot. Holding shift and mouse click will pan the asset like that. And scroll will zoom in and out. Those are basically the three I'll use. Yeah, no, that's it. A useful tool, if you have a number pad, so if you have a short keyboard, you can't do this, is if I move, once again, we'll get to that in a sec, and press period on the numpad, I will focus on the asset that I have in question, and the panning point will be around where that was. So if you notice, I'm panning around the point that I pressed period on. So if I press period again, I will rotate around that asset. So period is super, super useful for sort of restructuring where that is. I use that a lot. I think it's in here though. So here, align active camera to view, control alt numpad. Where is it? Zoom out. So you have, of course, most of these on your view if you need it. Where? This one, frame selected, numpad. So you could use view and all of these if you want to, but if you can learn the hotkey, you will thank yourself later. Or if you have that key, so that's another action as well. So that's navigating viewports, and you'll use all of them quite a lot. So get used to that, because of, yeah, that is one of the main things that you'll be using a lot. Right mouse click will give you a bunch of different tools. It will change depending on the state. So am I in edit or object? Different again. So right mouse click will be used a lot. And of course, left click will select your assets. You can change what kind of select it is. So do I have to select the whole asset? Things like that. So you can do that. I don't use it, but it's there. Okay, so that's navigation. Yeah. Next up, let's go into edit mode. Now, when you're editing assets, basically, you will be working with vertices. So these things. You'll go with edges, which are these things. And you'll go with polygons, which are these things. You'll use them all the time. Now, hotkeys, very important. These will be used a lot. So I'd recommend these hotkeys: 1, 2, and 3. So get used to those. Next up, we need to navigate these. Now, I could, if I wanted to, so if I select the polygon, use move, then I can use this tool here. It also gives you different axes if you want to. But what I will usually do is actually just press G. Now notice how the position of that is according to the viewport. So if I wanted to go on a local axis, I will do that, or press G and then go X, and you can see the pink line, and then move it. So G and then Y, G and then Z. So that's position. So basically, those are very important. If you want to, I could actually go G, Y, 0, 1. Hang on. G, Y, 4. Yeah. So you can position things by pressing G a direction or just +4, and that'll also help. But usually because I'm doing a game and not a building, so the engineering element is not there, a lot of the time I'll just eyeball it, and that's fine. So that's position. The next one we have is rotation. So we can do that once again. Or what I will usually do is press R. Once again, that's a viewport. If I press Y, it'll be on the Y axis. X, it'll be on the X axis. And Z will be on that. But that's rotating on that line because there's 2 polygons. So if I do this, nope, rotate, that's one. Now I can, if I do move, I can do that. But then if I switch, I can rotate. And scale, if I want to, I can do that. So you can change your mind if you figure out what you want to do there. So the last one, of course, is scale. So let's select 2 things. Press S. And Y, which doesn't scale that way. X doesn't scale that way, but Z does scale in that way. So basically, those tools are super useful, and you will use them forever. So get comfy. You can use these if you're more comfortable with them. But you'll find that most developers will use the hotkeys and bounce around them a lot. So that's position, rotation, and scale. Cool. So let's go into some of these tools in order to look at what I use the most. So I'm going to go to polygon mode, or press 3. These ones, not so. Hey Vega, how's it going? If I select a polygon, or even a vertex or an edge, you can extrude. Now, if you're coming from architecture, this is kind of similar to a sweep where you're putting polygons on a path. This one doesn't have a path, but you can just move things up and down. So you can see the edge there. Now, notice I pressed E to move it up, and then right mouse click to sort of cancel the movement of it, but it is still there. So if I press G, I can move it up and down and do that. If I want to get rid of that, I can press undo. So usually, if I have extrude, I will do that up and then let go, and then that's made. Undo. But if I do up, especially if I use the short key, which is E, which I will do because extrude comes up a lot, and then right mouse click, it'll go back to its original position, but it will still be there. So there's that. So extrude's super useful. Use this, or once again, hotkeys will save you a lot of time and do cool stuff. Now, of course, you can do this with edge. 2 for the edge, E, and you have that as well. Delete will, in edit mode, will give you some options. So I press delete, and this comes up. I can delete the vertices of the selection if I'm in a polygon mode, or the vertices if I delete that directly. I can do the edges. I can do the faces. Another one that you will find useful is dissolve edges. So it will get rid of the edge, but it won't delete the asset. So between these three and these three, I'll usually use those. Dissolve edges are very important. So let's get rid of that face. So we have a box. Now remember, because normals are only one-sided, if I put this into Unity, I would see the outside of the box. I would not see the inside. So that would just be see-through, which would be very strange, albeit cool effect. Okay. Next one I use a lot is inset. Usually I use this on polygons. I will grab the polygon and then just move that in. And then it just makes an inset. Now this one's a really good example of applying transforms. So I'm going to teach that again. It's going to select the polygons, press G to move, Z to go up, like so. I'm going to go to 3 for a polygon and scale again. And we have that. So that works. But if I scale the polygon, the object, as an object, like so, and then inset, you'll notice that the sides here are not correct. Now I may be able to use this tool down here. So this comes up when you make or do something, and as soon as you apply it, it goes away. So it's semi-destructible. So yeah, so all of this scale is wrong because I scaled the object and not the polygons. So once again, if I go Control A in object mode and apply, let's say, scale, go back to edit. Actually, I'm gonna get rid of that one. Now notice this is 2.34. I'm hoping. Yeah. So I'm going to Control in object mode, Control A, scale, so 111. Go back to edit mode and edit here, and that will fix the scale. So this is a prime example of why apply transforms is super useful and very important if you're editing the asset. So that works. So that's inset. You have a lot of tools down here. I won't go into those, but we'll keep it simple. We're trying to anyway. But yeah, so that's a super useful thing for apply transforms. Next up is bevel. Bevel on a polygon will sort of bevel the edge, and that's it. So I can, if I want to, do that. And then if I wanted to, I can do some segments, so add that in there. This is especially important on edges like this, if you want to sort of get that beveled effect. Note that it does get a little messy, depending on how complex your shape is. But we'll leave that. So let's clean this up a bit while we're here. So I'm going to delete face, edge with 2. Notice how we have that. We'll get to that in a sec. So let's go E. And we'll get our side again. That's all nice and neat. Let's go vertex mode. So select. And notice how these ones aren't selected. That's an X-ray example. So did that, look over here, not selected. X-ray on, select, all selected. So X-ray mode is very, very useful. And with this one, once again, I could use scale here, or I could just go S for scale, Z for Z-axis, and press 0. So it scales down to 0. And then press space. And that will apply it. So that's cool. Next up, loop cut. Loops are very important in game design because it keeps your asset really clean. And by making it clean, you can edit faster, if that makes sense. So if I brought in an asset from Revit or Rhino, there's no edges. It's just a mass of polygons. So if I wanted to sort of edit like the half point, it's actually very hard to do that. Whereas if I do an edge, it's very, very easy to do that. So edges, as you will learn, will help you. To do that, we can just click on that and then click, click, click. Another approach is click and then add how many. And there are other things. They'll play with these if you want to. You can do some really cool effects there. But the other approach is, even if I'm up here, I can go Control R. And then that's one. If I use the scroll button, I can add loops. Like so. Press left mouse button, and then I can move it up or down. And then if I want to put it right in the center, because I've moved it, I will right mouse click. And then it's done, and I can adjust as needed. So this is a bit more complicated than most things. But I will go over that again because it's ridiculously useful. Once again, we have loop cut. And as you can see, it has Control R as the shortcut. There. All of these have shortcuts. So bevel is Control B, inset is I, extrude is E. So you can use those. Because I use edge loops a lot, I will learn the hotkey. Once again, Control R to show where to go. Scroll to add. So let's do 2. Left mouse click to apply. And then up and down on the mouse to say where to put it. If you want it there, you would just go left mouse button and it's done. Or right mouse click to put it back in the center. So super powerful. And just, actually, let's go back to this one. Now, if you hold down the click button, if you hold down the button, it allows you to give you some other options. Anyone with the little arrow here. So this one does, this one does, this one does, this one does. So hold that down, and you have some options for how it extrudes. So extrude along normals, extrude individual, extrude cursor, things like that. Cursor, once again, is that little circle there. So we don't want that one this time. So let's look at examples. So if I go like that, it'll just extrude it in one direction altogether. I do not want that. Put that back in. Next up, extrude manifold is really interesting. For more complicated shapes, this one doesn't really apply. So if I get a chance, I'll look at that, but maybe not in this tutorial because it's a bit complicated. But extrude along normals, this one is super useful because you can do that. So every normal, once again, the perpendicular to the polygon will extrude out in that direction. So you get this sort of effect, which is cool. This one, extrude individual. So as you can see, if I go off X road, you can see that individual one's done. And extrude to cursor, which I don't use very often because I don't use the cursor very often. These ones don't have ones. Loop cut, offset during loop cut, offset edge loop cut. Never use it. So don't know how, to be honest. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Don't use it. Don't worry about it. Feel free to learn it yourself, though. What else we got? Knife. This is also super useful. You can use the shortcut for a K. And what this does is I can basically put in an edge wherever I want. So it does give you some hints in regards to where is it. So over here, if the, like you can see that the line goes yellow, that means it's on the line, which is what you want. You don't want to put it here because then you'll have an extra polygon, which we don't want to do. And then when you press space, it will apply it, right? So if I look at the polygons for this one, because we missed the line, there will actually, let me try this because this is pretty cool. So there'll be sort of a polygon there. So that's one. And then you'll have your two triangles here. So we'll have 1, 2, 3 polygons when that should be there, which would be 2. So making sure... How do I get rid of this? I forget how to delete it. Oh no. It is cool, but how do you get rid of it? Let's go to object mode. Oh boy. Ah, this one. Yeah. I'm going to tell you to erase it, that one. Okay, bye-bye. Tool selection? What do you mean? Active tool? Or this one? Ah. Teach me, Vega. What have I done wrong? I'm just going to delete it. Problem solved. On the right of the screen. That makes no sense. When you press N on the right of the screen... Ah, this one. Ah, that one. Okay, let me see. Because that would be useful to know. There we go. Tool. Which one? Ah, okay. All right, so that's that. Useful tool. Never use it. So yeah. Yeah. Got it. Understood. Much appreciated. Okay, so let's go back to edit mode. So that's knife. Now, useful tool when modeling is multi-selection, which is done with a shift key. So if I just click, it'll go to separate ones. But if I click shift, I can select multiple ones. Now, of course, this applies for everything. A very useful tool for this is if I use control, I can select between 2 points. So if I went there to there, it will sort of go around the shortest way possible. So if I do there to there, it will select everything through there. So holding left control, or probably either control, is a very useful tool for selecting really quickly. If I hold Alt, I will select the edge. So this is maybe clearer in this mode. So if I do Alt and click, it will select the edge. And this is where edge loops come in handy because you're selecting edges all the time if I want to scale or move or modify. So that's useful as well. So let's do this one. So if I select that and then that, note the white one is the selected or the active vertex. And I'm going to go right mouse click, merge vertices at last. You got at first, you can collapse, you can do by distance. So all of these are useful. But if I go at last, it will get rid of that polygon. So that's 2 polygons. Depends on what you class as an issue. For this example, the extra polygon is purely an extra polygon. And in games, you basically, every polygon counts. So yes, it's not a problem, apart from the fact that if you designed your whole asset to have polygons, like extra polygons that you don't need, each of those will start adding up, and that will affect your processing. Now, one here and there, not so much of a problem, but if every single cut you do had that extra polygon in a whole space, or if this was a pillar and you had 100 of them, that's 100 polygons that you don't need. But there's elements to that. So my approach to any game development is try to cut polys down as much as possible, just as a good habit to get into. And that is part of the skill of game development, is reducing polygons as much as you can. But yes, merging, depending on your resources. So I could, once again, go X-ray because I want to select all of them. Merge vertex by distance. And then down here, once again, this little tool here, you have your asset. So let's say 1. So that will merge all of the polygons that are 1 meter close into their own polygons. So merge, I will use all the time. Next one, Alt-click on an edge. I want to get rid of that edge. Because if you look at the asset, why is that? This one, viewport display. There we go. So when it comes to game design, if you can't see the polygon, get rid of it. This includes things like if this was behind a wall or this was coming out of a wall, I wouldn't see these. So let's say I had a wall coming here and here. These polygons would not be seen. Therefore, I would delete them. So any assets, any part of an asset that you don't see, so say for example the bottom of an interior object that you'll never use, you can delete it. Faces, done. So you had a wall here and a wall here, you don't see the floor. I'll get rid of them as well. Get rid of that one. Get rid of that one. Because you only see these because I want to extrude on the y-axis, extrude on the z-axis. So if I had a room this way, I would never see these polygons, so delete them, because a game engine will think it sees it. Unless you use some of the tools that Unity has to hide it automatically. But when you're rendering polygons, each one will make it think about it. And if you don't have the polygons to think about, it will be faster. So a lot of the time, you will make sure that you will delete the polygons you will not see in the space. And that's pretty important. So if we go back to our example, like so, if I go back to mode, you can't see these polygons. So unless there was a material reason to keep it there, say a trim sheet, don't worry about that, that's a later thing, I would delete it because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 polygons there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 polygons there. So that's 12 polygons, which is very small. It's not so much an issue at this level, but if you had a whole space, those start adding up real quick. So if you can't see it, get rid of it. And for that, I'm going to use delete, dissolve edges. So if I dissolve the edges, it gets rid of them completely, which we don't want. We just want that edge gone. So that's dissolve edges there. Done. So then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, note that polygons have 2 triangles. So let's go back into this. I'm going to go to tool. So when I say 6, I'm talking about triangles. So it would be 1, 2. This is horrible. Does this have a straight line? Yes, we do. Okay. Let's undo that. Oh, you can't undo it. Oh, that's annoying. Anyway. So let's get rid of that. Minus. delete that one more time. And let's get our line. So we have that triangle and that triangle. And this is called a polygon. So two triangles equal one polygon. And knowing the difference between those two is very important. Because we will use this equally when talking about how big is your asset and things like that. We have two polygons on this edge here. 1, 2. And then we have two polygons, two triangles here. And that goes all the way around. So when you're looking at assets, those triangles need to be as low as possible for both file size, so every polygon is information. And if you have millions of polygons, then you have millions of information, so that the file size will get bigger. And the other thing that applies is the computer will need to think about every single triangle it renders. So you want that number to be as low as possible and still look good. So you have that. Now, the other approach I would recommend, especially if you're beginning, is design your space to be low polygon. Because that is 100% a style now. So let's look at some examples. And you can do a lot with low polygon style, right? So you got low polygon art style, and it actually looks really good, especially because the rendering in game engines through lighting or light mapping, which is the whole thing, allows you some really good results with very low polygons. So if you look at those rocks, let's have a look. If you look at those rocks, they're very low polygon. You can see the polygons. But a mountain, it looks great. Same with these. These trees are very low polygon, but this scene looks very good because the lighting looks nice. So if you're starting, I would actually aim to create low polygon assets. There are many, many assets that allow that. So yeah. You can make your assets really quick with low polygon. And it looks really cool. So yeah, a mix of that. Okay, what else do we have? Now, knife is great for adding polygons if I want to, say, do this. And notice how, like, everything goes a bit funny. So once again, the polygons or the edges are what you're looking at editing. And we'll look at that as an example in a second. So I'm going to get rid of that one. The other one that you might use, delete, dissolve edges. Once again, this has a triangle, is bisect. Now this one's a bit weird to get used to, but once you know it, it's useful. So I'm going to go S-ray. I'm going to select the polygons. We need this. I'm going to select the polygons I would like to cut or bisect. Actually, I'm going to turn one of these off to show you what I mean. So I'm selecting a bunch of polygons that I would like to cut. Bisect. Now, once again, that's Shift 8, Shift B, Shift 8. Yeah, I'm going to select it. And then I'm just going to go cut across. So I'm going to actually sort of bisect that. And notice all of the polygons that I had selected will be cut all the way through, but the one that wasn't selected did not. Once again, you have some tools here. You can play with those, but once again, I usually just cut it and then it's done. So that's useful for like cutting assets if you have a direction in mind. You don't have to cut from here. You can cut from anywhere and just go cut. So you have that. Also useful. Potty build, I don't use. I should. It's probably very useful. I won't go into that. Spin is interesting. Once again, I've never used this, actually. So what does it do? Oh, there we go. That's fun. Um, Now, here is a good example of when you start looking at polygon choices. So, once again, game ready assets have less models, polygons, and that's very important. This is a lot of polygons for an object. Now, if this is a big object or an important object, maybe this is okay. If this is a small object, for example, a vase, this is too many. So I would maybe tweak some of these elements. Let's go 6, I think is good. And that is reasonable. So once again, if it's a low polygon or very far away asset, I would maybe do this number of polygons. But if I was a hero asset or a large asset, maybe I would do this many. I would never do this many. Never. WebGL is a limited resource for two reasons: file size and rendering ability, especially even more so if you're using mobile or VR. And as much as Mona doesn't support VR or mobile yet, it will in the future. But many of the spaces that are made are not optimized enough to work in either VR or mobile. Mobile, because a phone is a much smaller graphics card. You don't get an NVIDIA RTX card in an Apple phone, unfortunately, because that'd be cool. So we have to design to that. VR, on the other hand, is for different reasons. One, a Quest 2 is basically a high-end phone. But the big question there is, to make a comfortable experience in VR, you need at least 90 frames a second. On a desktop, you could get away with 30 frames or 40 frames a second. But with VR, it has to be basically over 90 frames a second. Otherwise, your user will get sick from VR sickness, which is a very common thing. Many games and studios have figured that out, and that's why Quest games, or Quest 2 games, or definitely Quest 1 games, have limited poly counts or material counts or textures and things like that. So keep that in mind. But for now, once again, if you're starting, don't worry about it. If you're starting, just build, create, learn, have fun. On that, Fractilians and Rizzle are having an event later today, I believe, to go over a lot of this stuff, actually. So feel free to jump in with them and check out in the Discord a bunch of tools to create. Okay. These ones also I don't use. Edge slide is useful. So edge slide, I will kind of slide. Let's get the edge. And do this. So this will actually slide the edge along the mesh. So that might be good for positioning or optimization or whatever you want it to do. So that's quite useful. Shrink, fatten, never use it. Actually, yes, I do, because I use Alt S, which is the shortcut. I just didn't know that was an actual tool as well. What this does is kind of scale out or scale in what the asset is. So if I select all of these and select this or use Control S, I can make it bigger or smaller. Now, this is very useful if I wanted to make some gloves. I would have a hand, duplicate the polygons, and make them bigger. Glove made. So that's a super useful one for those sort of things. Skew, or shear, once again, naming different assets, will allow you to do things like skewing or shearing your assets. That's it. There's not much else on that one. Once again, you have some tools. I don't use that one very often because usually I would grab the top. Actually, no, undo that. I would just grab the top and then move it like that. So sometimes shear is useful because of the shape that you're making. Sometimes it's faster to do it manually. All of them are correct. Once again, this one is one I don't use very often, but I've never used it. V, yeah, I haven't used that one. So not something I'm worried about, but let's give it a shot. I'd like to learn what it is. So let's go. So basically, I'm ripping that edge from there. So if I do that again, and then press Y, I can limit which axes it's working on. X, Y, Z. So we've got that. Useful. I don't use it. You can. I don't. So if I wanted to do that, next stage, go to Edge, press 2, press that, and then I will go right mouse click and go down to Separate, or Split actually. So I'd go Split, and then you got that. Now the problem is I've just split the edge, but not the polygon. So another approach, let's go back to Select, is I would split this, go to Edge, move that. I want the other one, move that. And then I would merge by distance. And down here you have remove 2 vertices. So there we go, that. So you have that control with these sorts of things. Let's make sure that's all back together. So we've got that. Okay. So let's do the last tools. Like I'm getting down to the end of all of the tools that I use in Blender, basically. So say, for example, I want to make a duplicate of this. I want 2 of these assets. I'm going to select all the things I want to duplicate. Let's say these. And I will use Shift, not Control. This is this takes a while. Shift D, you will duplicate. I'll press X to move it across the X axis. And then do that. And click to apply it. Now, as it stands, this is one asset. But I want this as a separate one. So I'm going to select all of that, right mouse click, and go Separate Selection. Now, this is still edited. So if I go Tab, I now have 2 assets. And I will automatically add the name because naming is very important. So box 2. And because I forgot about this one, I'll just go box 1. You can use spaces, that's not a problem. I usually don't, just because of old habits back when you couldn't have spaces in names. So there's that. All right. So now that we have the basics, and I think I've covered all of them, there might be some ones I've missed, but we can actually do a lot. So let's take all that information and make an asset. So I have my Halloween space, but because I'm going to release this, I don't want to make it too Halloweeny. So my assets I need is I kind of need a spooky lantern and kind of a modular fence. So let's look at those. So let's go. We have a lot of assets here that we can make. So planes, cubes, circles, spheres. I usually use UV sphere. This is too high polygon, so make sure to reduce that. So usually I'll put that down to 24 at most. And this is usually half that. So that's a good sphere. So just keep that in mind. But for this, we want a cube. If you make a cube, this cube is going to be 2 meters by 2 meters. So that would be the height of a VRM, for example. Because I have snap increment on, if I hold down control, I can move like 10 centimeters. Do that. I'm going to do control A, all transforms. Notice how the pivot point goes to 0, which is what we want, because if I go scale, we can do that. Once again, holding control to snap. But notice here how it's 0.2 meters at 0.1 scale. Now, if we imported this into Unity, that would not be very good because of a lot of reasons. So once again, I get into the habit of constantly going Control A in object mode, and then we have 111. You don't have to worry about that until you export, but I forget a lot of the time. So I recommend just getting into the habit so you don't have to worry about that. Okay, so let's get into a lamppost. So let's go spooky lamp post. Use reference. It's great. So we want this in kind of like a field. So kind of leaning towards this one. Oh, that's a nice idea. I want that kind of. I want that one. I know what I want. I'm trying to visualize it. Kind of like this. I like the lantern, so that's really good. But I want this sort of like broken down, rustic. Well, let's AI this. I've never thought about it, but AI art is basically Google Docs, rustic, stylized lamp post. Nah, that's a bit better. These ones. That's what I'm after. Oh, that's cool. All right, let's do that one. So, how tall is lamppost? Let's go 2.5. So X-ray, so I can select all the polygons. G, Z, 2.5. Let's add some edge loops. Control R. Add 2. Left click. Right click. S for scale. Z for up and down. Snap. That one. G, Z, up, up, up. Once again, snapping. But if you don't want to snap, you can do that as well. 3 for polygon. Select, E, scale. So we have that. We're going to keep that because I want to do an extrude to sort of make the metal. Like so. So I'm going to grab those. I'm going to pull this down to extrude along normals. Just go like that. Now the catch there though is this. So we actually want an edge there. So this metal part is on this side as well. So I'm going to undo that. Let's do it this way. There's many ways to do it. So I'm actually going to go Control R, loop here, move this up to there. Go back here. Remove those. Troubleshooting. Yeah. Let's do that as well. So in this case, because we actually have all of the assets there needed, I'm going to select those and go Alt S, which is this one, shrink and fatten, and see if this works. Kinda. Scale Z, GZ, edge, edge. So now that's a little bit more complicated than it needs to be. So I can do it that way, and that's how I would do it. But let's undo all that and do a simple version. So back to that. So second version is go to object mode, add a mesh cube, scale down. Oops. Why is that attached? Let's try that again. Add mesh cube. What is going on? What? Because of this. So what's happening is I'm scaling every object that's within this radius of a curve. So I see that dot. Yeah, we don't want that. There we go. So occasionally you'll leave something on and it'll mess stuff up. Animation is one of them, like having record on, not a good idea. And this one, and snap also does it. So keep that in mind. So I'm going to move that there. Move that up. So we have that there. Now another useful tool, this is a modifier, is Boolean. So we want union object. Nope. How does this work? I never use booleans because I always make it manually. So let's get rid of that one and do this properly. So this one, add a boolean union to that object. Get rid of that one, and then we have that. So I think we can get rid of that problem asset. So show it, delete it. Now notice because the cube has a boolean and we delete the asset, then it goes away. So I'm going to add that back. Go to this object and go apply, and then we can get rid of this cube, like so. Now, when it comes to low polygon assets, basically we have this polygon, and we'll do that because like it needs to sort of complete the object. But what I will do is use K and clean up the low polygon asset so that it kind of understands where the polygons are with K. So K cut, space to cut. K cut, cut, space to stop. K cut, cut, space. And then we have it. And then we have a really good low polygon edit there. Next up, let's do some more of that. I want to sort of put a metal thing here, so let's Control R. Or once again, you can use these if you need to. So we want edge loop, which is which one? This one. Nope, edge slide. Where was it? I never use it this way. Control B, Control R. I don't do polybuild. I'm sure that's a very useful tool. I just never use it. Yeah. I just use Control O. Scroll for 2. Left to accept. I'm going to move them up a little bit there. S for scale. S. Now we don't want that just yet. I do want a stylized, so I'm going to use Y and then make a square sort of there. X-ray mode. Now you can do X-ray mode with a hotkey. I never do, but I should. Alt Z. Back to select. Now, because I've set that, if I press E, it will do a standard extrude, which is not what I want. I want this one. So, which is what we're after. Kind of want that element there. So for that one, I'm going to grab, oops, not that. Back to like, and this is why I don't use these. I use the short keys if I have them, because bouncing between these slows you down. So learning the hotkeys is very, very important. So hopefully, telling you what the hotkeys are when I use it will give you the lead in to do that, rather than going over here every time. Because learn the hotkeys. It does take a while, 100%. But if you just stay on this, then you can do all of your edits really quick. So for this asset, I don't want to do the edge, the cube, and all the rest of it. I just want these polygons to be here. So I want to duplicate them. So Shift D. Just move it down. I can press Z if I want to limit it, but not important. So do that. Rotate 45 degrees. Now notice that up the top left here, it will show you the rotation that you're doing. So R to rotate. Using Control to shift. So I want 45. And put that kind of in there. Now I want this one to be a bit smaller, so I'm going to scale. Let's put that maybe there. 1 for vertex mode, and then scroll that up. Now, I don't need to make sure it's 45 degrees. I'm going to snap it there. That's good. Now, once again, I want the poly count to be low. Now, this is actually the lowest poly count. If I merge these two assets, I would actually make more polygons. So I'm actually going to save it like this. This is all we want. These don't matter because you can't see them. That's the effect. But just to show you, to make this very clear, I'm going to select that asset and I'm going to separate it. Selection. So that's separate. And then let's do another Boolean with this asset. Now note, you can use difference, you can use intersect, but in this case we want union. I'm going to apply that so I can get rid of this one. And notice here that now there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 polygons there, another 8 there. So that's 16 extra polygons for something that will look exactly the same. So this is an example of what you would not do. Now, I could have done that with this as well. So there's many different ways to do it, and a lot of them are similar. Doesn't really matter. Once again, this is low polygon, so 16 polygons won't matter. But if this was a high-end asset, it would matter quite a bit, because instead of 16 polygons difference, it would be 1,000. And that makes a difference. So I'm going to undo that to the point of that. Now, thinking about it, this asset is kind of the same thing, but these are two differences. So this approach is better than blending because polycount is king. Same with this. I probably, once again, this will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 polygons. It's cleaner. So when you look at it, it looks like that. It's very neat. But we actually want the cubes. So I'm going to go back a bit and clean this up to do so. So I'm going to select those, once again, Alt, click to get an edge loop, Alt, Shift, click to multi-select an edge group, delete, dissolve edges. Don't, delete, dissolve edges. Now, because these are triangles, there's no loop. So I need to shift all of these, delete, dissolve edges. Then we have this problem. So once again, delete, dissolve edges. And then we have this problem here. So for that, I'm going to use K, which is a knife tool. This one. It deleted them. All this is one polygon, which is what we don't want. And sometimes it doesn't like it. So I'm actually going to delete that, all of the faces, and use another tool that I use all the time, which is select an edge, select another edge, and press F. And that will join them. Now, the reason that exists is because you need to go to add-ons. Add-ons are a bunch of stuff, but there are some very useful ones which I recommend. So that one is F2. That's it. It's a bit of a weird one, but it is super useful for adding polygons and connecting things. So I use F2 all the time. So once again, go to Edit, Preferences, and up here in the search, do F2, and make sure this is on. You can pull this down to pull up some if ideas, and this will allow you to do these elements. And one of the main ones is selecting polygons and pressing F to join. Oops. 2, 3. Now that's just cleaned that up. Now I'm going to get rid of these two, like so. Dissolve edges. Let's get this one, move it back, like so. Now in this case, what I'm going to do is get the polygon, front polygon. Now notice how I'm selecting the polygons by the dot. That is the best way to select polygons. So whichever dot is closest is the one it's going to select. So I may be on the front, but because I'm in X-ray mode, it will select the back one. So that's a note as well. So I'm going to make sure there's no polygon there. Yep. F2. F2. Now, note that what I am doing, you wouldn't have done if you just did the rectangle at the start. So the reason I'm doing this is because I'm joining those two. And it's not as neat as it used to be because I had that. So yeah. Not the most approach, not the most clean approach to it. To the point that I will actually clean that off and start again, because this is getting way more complicated than it needs to be. Apologies for that. So what we're going to do is grab this, extrude this out to say there, close that, extrude up, extrude down. Done. I want to put that line at the bottom, so I'm going to go G, Z for axis 0. Oh, no. That won't work because it's 0 to where it is. So let's just go up there. Okay. Okay, that works. Now, once again, cleaning assets though. So we have these, and those will never be seen because we're going to put a box over it. So I'm going to select that, and that, merge. That, and that, merge. That, let's put it down the bottom. Merge, and merge. Once again, there's no difference to the polygon, but now it is the same result with less polygons. So let's get some metal involved. So I'm going to add a mesh. Cube. Scale that down to about maybe that. Move that up to about there. Excellent. I might scale this down a little bit. X-ray mode. Scale it this way. Just to get that sort of same edge around. Good. I'm going to duplicate this because it's going to be the one material type. So duplicate Y. Let's put it, yeah, maybe there. And let's also do one down the bottom, like so. Okay. Excellent. So now that we have our tool, I'm going to make some materials. So let's go wood. So once again, how many materials are here? Slots. So I can minus that one if you want. Notice that I've already made some. So I'm actually going to just go wood. I'm going to make this brown. Darker brown like that, maybe. Yep, that looks. And then I'm going to apply this one. This mode doesn't show textures. This one does. So if you're looking at textures or simple textures, this one's good. Now this one we want to be metal. So I'm going to get cool metal and I'm just going to rename this one metal. Double click, we'll rename it. The name is very important because when you import into Unity, you will see this name of the thing. So if you just had material 1, material 2, material 3, you'll actually have to like manually figure it out. But if you name it correctly, that will help a lot. So let's just change this a little bit to a bit more gray. That's good. So we have 2. All right, let's continue. We want sort of the light. So we want this to be metal as well. Need X-ray mode, so we can select all of the assets on the other side. Shift D to duplicate. Let's make it a bit bigger. To there. There. Yep. Control R for a loop. Let's move it there. Scale, S. There. Kind of actually want to move that down. GZ to there. And we have our little lantern. Next up, let's do the inset, which is this one. And inset. Now note how it did it local. So it's all of them. We don't want that. We want individual, like so. Clicking anywhere will get rid of it. Alexa, stop. Now in this case, we want to sort of go through so we can sort of see a light or something. So I'm going to do another very useful tool that I use a fair bit. So we select these two, right mouse click, bridge faces. Now the problem with that is it's very difficult to do it on the second one. No, it's actually going to be, because this side doesn't have the edge loop. So I'm actually going to do Control R, this one, scale X, that one, and that way we can now do it very easily. There we go. If you see the bottom of this, I want to make a cool sort of extruded base at the bottom there. So E, that's good. I might want to make that one go up a bit as well. So let's go E there. And then scale to there. Wherever I like. Again, inset. Move that one up a bit with G, Z. Now, the next thing we want to do is kind of like a chain of sorts, because that'd be cool. So for this one, I'm actually going to copy this. Whoops. So for this one, select the selection tool. I want to grab our box, shift duplicate that, move it down, and then scale it. Maybe that'll be good. R, scale it this way. One, G, Z, up. Inset. Be there. Right mouse click, bridge faces. Oops. Cool. All right. Next up, select tool. X-ray mode's on, so it's all selected. Shift D, maybe there. Let's rotate it this way so you can sort of see it. Now, in a lot of spaces, you don't want everything to be super clean and super straight, because that doesn't really add a lot of life to the space. So for that, I'm going to modify this a little bit. Now, another useful tool when you're selecting assets is Control L. And that will select the whole asset that you're looking on. So we can do that. So if I do this again, Control L, that's great. Control L, both of them. Then we can go Control D, Shift D, move it down. And then we have the ability to duplicate the assets really quickly. Okay. Now you'll probably guess that because you don't see these assets, these polygons under there, I'm going to delete them. Be careful with your selection. That's good. Now you don't need to, but I do. Is just clean things up a bit. Once again, Alt for the edge loop. Scale Z0, G up. So that's neat. Now, as noted, we want to rotate some of these a little bit. So RZ to add a little bit of interest. Well, let's go that way. That is much more interesting now. So we've got that. Now we'll want a little bit of glass here. So let's do that. Now, how would I do that? Because it's at an angle. Do I use these? Yeah. Okay. So this is similar. So I'm going to duplicate that. Shift D. Move it there a little bit. Go this way. Move it there a little bit. Go to vertex mode. Once again, as long as you don't see it, it doesn't really matter where it is. Like so. That's good. But in this case, we want a new material. So I'm going to separate this asset. Selection. And then I'm going to change this to material and then change the name of this to glass. Now notice how this is a good example of what you wouldn't see. You would see this side. Well, let's find out. Face orientation. You would see this side, but you wouldn't see this. But because there's going to be glass on all of them, that's fine. So I'm going to do this. Actually, I kind of like the broken approach. That'll give a bit of life to it, I think. So let's sort of do an interesting element of a bit rough. I think that'll be nice. Polygon, duplicate. Move this on the y-axis. The y-axis. Now, this is a prime example of what has happened with the face orientation. So this side is good, but this side isn't, because if I look at this, I wouldn't see this polygon. I would only see this one. So for that, we need to mesh, normals, flip. And that's good. Next up, I'm going to select those two. Go up the top. Shift D to duplicate. Right mouse click to center it, and then go R. If the colors are weird, it's probably because you've still got face orientation on. There we go. All right. Now, next up, let's stylize this a little bit more before wrapping it up for our asset creation. So, this is very straight, but I want to get that sort of World of Warcraft style. So, for that, I'm going to actually get rid of these two polygons or edges. because I want to go right. Okay. So because of how this is set up, edge loops don't work, and I can only sort of snap both of that. So instead, I'm going to use bisect, which is this one, this one. Select all the polygons. Let's go here. Now I can't add them here. So in this case, I want to just bisect a few different versions. So there, maybe, oops, bisect, yeah, maybe there. And now, because we have a loop here, like two edge loops that are correct, we can go Control R. What wrong? Scale down, edge, edge, scale down, and just scale it up to get that sort of edging there. Scale Z. Now, with the top one, we should be able to do this much easier. So let's go those three with Control R. Scale down. Edge loop selection. Scale down again. Good. We want this to line up as well. Scale down. Do we want to put it on this one as well? Maybe a little bit. Just one. Scale down. And there we have a stylized asset. Now, note if you look really close, you can actually see the polygon, and you may not want that. So some low polygon assets will make every facet really clear, and some won't. I usually go with the won't. So to do that, what you can do is go to normals, auto smooth, and anything that is bigger than this angle will be smoothed as long as, and this is the catch, so that's what you want, and then you go object, shade smooth. So object mode, object, shade smooth. And you'll notice that line is gone, but if it's over 90 degrees or over 30 degrees, in this case, it will be a hard, but if we did say 100, it will smooth everything. So once again, object data properties, the green triangle, go down to normals, put auto smooth on at 30, and then go object shade smooth, and then you'll have these smooth areas depending on the sort of style that you want. So same with this one. Now we want that to be sharp, but if we go same again, shade smooth, I can smooth that if I wanted to, but let's say we go 10, that'll do that. So it really depends on the sort of effect that you want. So let's say we want the top to be smooth, but this line to be not. So 30, there we go. 25. So that's blended, but this isn't. So yeah, there's all those sort of choices. And if auto smooth is off, it will just smooth everything. So for this metal object, we don't want that. So we can go back to shade flat, like so. And there we go. So that's exactly 2 hours, which is what we want. So we covered a lot. Now I do plan on making tutorials that will break this up even smaller and easier. But if you're in a pinch, this covers all of the basics of creating an asset. I did use hotkeys a lot. I was trying to describe them as I went, purely because hotkeys are what will save a lot of time. So I would recommend learning the hotkeys straight off the bat. to the point where like you don't even use the side menus for most of the assets. So extrusion and things like that. So hopefully that's helped. And yeah, we will be building on this ecosystem of Blender documentation. We'll also add into other programs such as maybe Substance Painter and Unity navigation basics. So we will be hopefully helping a lot of people get into these tools a bit easier. Workshops are tricky to keep it very clean. There's a lot of stuff to learn. But once again, jump in with Fractillions and Rizzle, and you'll have a real world example of someone asking a lot of questions in regards to making these assets. With a workshop on the YouTube, you can sort of go back and go over it as needed. But once again, we've covered a lot. This is not usually done in one session. Usually you'll have the basics sort of broken up into different sections, but we'll have that available for people to check out if they've never used Blender before. So hopefully that's helped. And we'll leave it there. Have a good day and catch you later. Bye.